Hi there. I bet you're here today to learn how to change a snare drum head. What I'd like to show you today actually will cover pretty much any kind of tension rod drum head. Show you what you need, show you how to do it, and we'll even talk a little bit about why you would need to do this. So the first question I'm asked frequently is, why would I ever need to change my drum head? And there's a couple of reasons for that. During the course of, for example, maybe a marching season or a bad moving session or a beginner percussionist not knowing yet how to treat their equipment with the care it deserves, you might have a broken head, meaning like the actual surface of the head has a split or crack in it, or there's a puncture wound from an errant drumstick. It might be just old, right? It might not be responding like it should to different playing techniques or really anything. It could be dirty. Same thing, maybe it's been stored for a while, maybe it's been had something spilled on it that can't just be wiped off, or maybe it's gotten underneath the head. Or maybe you're just getting an inconsistent sound. There's different parts of a drum head that contribute to the kind of sound that it makes and the quality of sound that it makes. So you could have maybe the binding around the head separate, and if it's a 2-ply head, the plies are separating and you're getting weird air pockets in there. There's a couple of things that could contribute to that, but those are the main reasons that I would say are a good answer to the question, why would I change a drum head? So when would I change a drum head? Definitely anytime it breaks. I get that question a lot, when's a good time? Obviously, if there's damage to the head, you want to change it because you could be putting more extra wear and tear on the drum itself, on the bearing edge of the drum, which I'll show here in just a moment. There's a couple of different times of the year that you can kind of start thinking about drum heads. So if you're during marching season, a lot of times marching heads are pretty expensive, so I like to think of probably 2 times a year, maybe 3. It just kind of depends on your budget and what you're working with. But I usually will change them at the beginning of like a summer band session. So if you're about to start drumming for 4 or 5 weeks straight, multiple hours a day, it's good to have a new set of heads on there. Also, if there is a big competition that you have at the end of the year, maybe a big football game coming up, it's good to throw on a new head for that as well. So the last thing that I will cover in this video is really the tools that you would need. I'm going to cover some extra things that I'm not actually going to show you today, but I'll explain why and what those are. Just because in certain times you change a head or you need to open the drum for some reason, you may do these things, but you may not need to. The first thing that you definitely need, no matter what drum you're working on, if it's of course a key tunable, is a drum key. Cool. So if you buy a snare drum, if you buy a drum set, definitely if you buy a marching drum, you're going to get some kind of drum key with it. It's typically in some sort of T shape, so where you can have leverage to turn it. The important thing to remember, I'm going to be demonstrating all of this on a concert snare drum, and you just want to have a key that's appropriate for the type of drum that you're going to do maintenance on. So drum set, toms, drum set snare, even a kick drum on a drum set, you can definitely use one of these sort of real basic keys. If you're working on a marching snare drum, marching tenors, marching bass drum, you might want the elongated, they call them high tension keys. The T is about that long, the shaft is a little bit higher on there, you get a little bit more leverage when you're working. I also personally use a ratcheting drum key for almost everything I do. It cuts down on the time, and once you get the feel for it, you can really save time and get a really consistent tuning. I'm not going to cover that today. I may cover that with my tuning video, but it's best, especially for somebody new to drum maintenance and working on a drum. It's best to use just sort of a manual tool with no ratchet or no extra mechanical advantage for you. The next thing I always suggest is, while you're inside the drum, it's a perfect time to wipe the drum down. So, and actually, as I go through my steps, I'll show you there's a couple of times you want to be aware of when and where to wipe down, but It's always good to start with a clean drum. It's always good to have a clean drum, so you may as well do it while you're changing the head. Stuff gets in, especially any drums with air holes. Marching drums, concert bass drums especially, are going to have stuff that gets in there, and so, you know, a little cloth to help you wipe it out and clean it up is always a good thing to have. Cool, so the last couple of things that you would want to have ready are, if you're going to be doing like a brand new snare drum or anything that's going to have high tension on it, maybe even like a kick drum or a high tom. A lot of times you'll add either lithium grease or white lightning is the name of a popular style of this. I don't know that it's specifically for drums. They have drum tension rod grease. A lot of times you pay a little bit more just because it says it's for drums, but if you find lithium grease or the product white lightning, you'll be in good shape. Like I said, I don't have that today because this drum doesn't need that at this moment. The last thing that I also don't have, because this particular drum doesn't need a new head at this juncture, is a new head. But what I'll do is when I get this head off, I'll kind of show you the parts of it and how it's put together and how you would want to situate it on the drum. So next, I'm going to go through the step-by-step process of how I change a head. There's other things that you can do while you do this. It's mostly going to be used if you're going to need to actually replace the head. But there's other things you can do if you just need to get something out of the drum safely, or if you need to tighten the nuts or bolts inside the drum, you can do that as well. But with this step-by-step process, I'll kind of show you how everything can be done at the same time. So the step that I like to start with, that I think gets neglected probably more than we as percussionists like to admit, is taking this time to clean, or to at least wipe off the drum. There's a lot of things that this can do. For example, especially with marching season in full swing, you might have grass, dirt, sweat. All manner of things could be on the drums, and if you leave that on there as you pull the tension rods off, it's possible that could fall into the lug or the tension rod receiver, and you're going to end up perhaps causing yourself more heartache than you need. So I got a pretty good deal on some microfiber cloths. It doesn't have to be anything like this. It could be a terry cloth, it could be a cotton rag, it could be a sock, a clean sock, anything really that's going to take some of that grime away. And this drum has been pretty much kept inside, so there's not a lot to clean here, but it is worth, definitely a worthy step in the process for a lot of reasons, but most of them are just sort of a good basic maintenance thing. So step 2 is going to be to take your drum key and you're going to select a starting tension rod. What I mean by that is we're going to go in sort of a pattern. We're going to hit all of the tension rods because they all have to come off at the same time, but you're going to sort of start your pattern on one tension rod and then follow it all the way around. And it's usually, a lot of people find success just starting wherever. If it's a snare drum, for example, start where the snare strainer is. Or if your drum has a badge on it, so like mine is on this side here, I could say I'm going to start on the one that's by the badge. So for this purpose, I'm going to start here, which is by my snare strainer lever, which is on the opposite side. So you're going to pick a starting lug, starting tension rod, and go from there every time you repeat your patterns. Once you have your first tension rod selected, what you're going to do is go all the way around the drum, and you're going to do what we call breaking loose the tension rod. Right? So if it's held playing tension for a while, it's got to a place where the head is set. It's not changing drastically unless there's a huge temperature change. So what you're going to want to do is loosen each of these just enough to where you feel it start to actually change. Right, so you don't need to loosen it all the way. It's actually better if you don't do that. So we're going to break loose each of these tension rods. Okay. You may hear the drum sort of crackle and pop. You may hear the head change some things as well, and that's normal. And the reason why we don't want to do it quickly or all at once on one tension rod is because that pop will turn into a crack or a splitting of the shell or something that we want to avoid. Probably the most important part here is the pattern. There's a million different ways to tune or detune a drum. I'm going to use what we call the star pattern. So you pick your starting tension rod, break it loose, and you're going to go across the drum. You're going to do the same thing. You're just going to break it loose, usually between half a turn and a full turn. So you go across, and then you go to either side. It doesn't really matter as long as you end up covering them all. I'm going to go to the left side here. Break that one loose. So I've gone one over, now I'm going to go across again. And kind of continue. If you go, for example, if you go anti-clockwise, just continue to go anti-clockwise when you go to the side. So go up this one more, and then across. Anti-clockwise again, across, all the way there. So if it's broken loose, you should feel the head has some give now. We're not yet to the point where we can actually remove it, but we have broken it loose and we are ready to continue to the next step. Now that we have broken all of our tension rods loose, we are ready to actually remove them from the lug that holds them, and then therefore remove the rim and the head itself. So I'm going to continue through the pattern onto my first one that I've chosen, which, like I said, is by my snare lever. I'm going to continue turning until I can actually pick up the tension rod from the lug. So depending on what kind of tension rods you're working with or what kind of drum you have, this could take not very long if it's like a drum set tom, or it could take a little bit of time. This is where a little bit of patience helps. It's good to have on some, good drumming music while you're doing this type of work. Once it gets to a certain point, you can just loosen it with your fingers. You follow my same pattern here. And once they do come loose, you can just leave them there, still attached to the rim if that's how your rim is set up. And we're gonna lift the whole affair off at the same time. It's gonna save us trouble trying to find things. If you do need to grease your tension rods, this would be a good time to separate them as you're taking them off, as they come separate from the drum. And I'll show you how that works as well. We have loosened all of our tension rods from the drum. They are separated completely. And what we're gonna do is lift the entire rim and all the tension rods with it together. Now, not every drum has this style of rim where it's gonna catch the tension rods, but if it does, this makes everything a lot easier to deal with. And if you have a good workspace, you should just be able to sort of set this down all together. Right, so now we are just left with the head and the drum itself. Great, so now that we have the hardware removed, we're gonna go ahead and remove the head, and we're gonna wipe everything down that's inside here, including the head itself. Since I'm not actually changing this head, I'm gonna take this time to sort of clean it up. You will be surprised at how much stuff you get out. So this is like I said, this is an inside drum, and there is some nonsense on there. And we don't want that nonsense getting into our drum and messing up the finish or messing up anything. So I'm gonna take this time to wipe around on the inside. This being a drum set snare drum, Not too much bad in here. I pretty much only use this one inside anyway. But again, one of these things that we forget to do a lot, and I think it makes a big difference in the way we take care of our equipment. Set that back down. We're ready for the next step. So at this point, this would be where we would take our new head and place it on top of the drum. Another thing I think that gets overlooked probably more than it should is the orientation of the head. Most drum heads have some kind of logo on them, unless it's, been specifically removed. But a lot of them, the big companies pretty much all have the name on it. And so I like to line up the logo with some landmark on the drum. If it's a snare drum, I might put it directly in line with the snare strainer so that it's sitting over the snares. With a marching snare drum, often it will end up sort of looking like this because of the orientation of the snares. You might put it over the guts of the snare drum. If it's a drum set tom, hopefully you've got a pretty consistent setup with how you have your toms oriented. It's really nice to have that extra level of aesthetic congruence, I guess, to have the heads all facing in at least some kind of way, right? So if they're all at the top, then they're all at the top. Or if it's like they're all at the bottom, sort of facing away from you, that's a thing too. It's certainly not a necessary step, but I think it adds, like I said, that one extra layer of, making us not just drummers. We're percussionists who are diligent about maintaining our equipment, and we, care what it looks like. So we want to put the new head here, find whatever orientation that you like, and basically from here we're going to do the same process in reverse. Great. So we are ready to reassemble the drum. We're now going to take our still assembled tension rod rim assembly and sort of drop it back on there. So now is another good time to double check the orientation of the logo. If you have a certain orientation you were looking for, it's very possible that when you drop the rim and sort of try to reseat it to get all the tension rods lined up, that the head can rotate, and that's okay. But once you start applying tension to those tension rods, it's going to be a lot harder to change the orientation. So now's a good time to check it out. I'm going to put mine right at 12 o'clock. Cool. So at this point, since there's no tension on the drum, we can kind of do whatever we want. What I usually will do is take two at a time, just with my hands, and I'll finger tighten everything. All right. Now, not to be too scientific about this, because further than this, we would want to tune the drum for whatever tuning we were looking for. That's actually going to be a separate video. It's a whole other thing that requires some time and effort. But this is really just like, if you can get your head changed, that can be a really good thing for maintenance of the drum. So you can maybe avoid injury to like the bearing edge of the drum, or putting extra tension on the shell where it doesn't need to be. As I'm adding finger tightness here, we should get to a point where it wouldn't comfortably turn. Like, you could probably turn it more with your fingers, but what we're just looking for is something that's basically even, because we're about to put the key to it and tune it back up to about where it was. So there's no set definition, but a lot of people consider you're done finger tightening when you can't tighten it comfortably anymore without a tool. We're at the point where we're going to start applying the drum key, and just for continuity's sake and to build a consistent approach to this particular endeavor, we're going to start with the tension rod that we've elected as our starting tension rod. You may notice that some of mine are not all at the same height. That's okay. We're not yet applying tension. Some of them were maybe a little bit more trapped, some stuff in there more so than others, and that's okay. Like I said, since I didn't grease anything today, there might be varying levels of resistance here. But what we're doing here is exactly the same as we were doing. Okay, so the goal is to raise the tension of the drum as evenly as possible. So it's going to feel like probably 2 to 3 half turns. And so I say half turn. So if my key is here, that's a half a turn. That's 2. You might see me do a little bit more than that right now because my finger tightness was a little bit different. And I'll sort of be adjusting all of this as I go. Once you start to develop a feel for it, you can kind of hear what the drum is trying to tell you. Like, you know, this tension rod is super loose. You might have to turn this an extra time or two to get it to the same tension. Okay? But in general, we want to go as patiently as we can. As we apply tension to this instrument. So 1, 2, 3, I'm about to where they're all 1, 2, 3, finger tight-ish. 1, 2, see that one feels a little tight, so I'm actually gonna come off of that one a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, that one feels a little tight as well. So this one's super loose. You'll notice too, as you, even if you're trying your best to make it as even as possible, you're gonna get tension rods that have tension applied quicker and some that take a little bit more time. And that's normal and that's okay. That one's real tight. Great. So what you can do, not to go too much into tuning, but there is definitely something you can do to check that the evenness of your tension is about where it's supposed to be. It's always good to have a drumstick nearby if you're doing maintenance on a drum. If you're working on a snare drum, you'll want to turn the snares off for this particular thing. So you can hit it in the middle. Make sure that there's no huge waves like meow, meow. Okay, so it's got some ring to it, so I know it's probably about even. But then what I'll also do after that is I will test each part of the head that's by a tension rod. So you may notice that they're, you know, sometimes between a quarter step and a half step difference in pitch. And if one is lower than the other, you might need to tune the lower one up. Or if you set the original one like we did here, you can just go tension rod to tension rod and compare them. So these are not perfectly even, certainly, but I like to do this when I'm about, you know, 2/3 of the way done tuning, so that I'm sure that the tension on each tension rod is about even. So I'm going to do another half turn, whoop, except for this one, which appears to have loosened up on me. Another about half turn. And again, this is not a completely perfect science. You kind of learn to feel different levels of tension as you go. Right. So that should be a little bit higher in pitch. It's a lot higher in pitch, but that's fine. So that to me sounds like they're all about the same. And they're actually pretty close to the center of the head as well, which is a wonderful plus. If you take the time and you learn how to feel about the tension, the resistance that each tension rod has, you'll get better at tuning a lot faster. Thank you all so much for watching. I would love to hear your comments and see, do you do things differently? Do you have a question about why we do something or a specific technique, or do you need any more tips and tricks? I'm always more than happy to help. I believe that maintaining drums is a huge part of what we do as percussionists, and especially if you're starting out as a percussionist, you shouldn't be intimidated or frightened by the idea of tuning or maintaining your instrument. It's just like how saxophones change the reeds and brass players clean their mouthpieces and oil their valves. It's all the same thing. We all have responsibilities to do to make sure that our instruments sound exactly the way they should and perform the way they should when we play them. The tuning aspect of drums, like I said, is quite a bit more complex, and there's a lot of different, more situational things. So that will be explained in a future video, and that's another one there's a million right ways to do it. And so I would love to have a conversation about tuning. So stay on the lookout for that video, and I will see you all next time.